Chesed yibaneh, ya la lai, 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 ya la lai, lai. Olam chesed yibaneh, ya la lai, 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 ya la lai, lai. Psalm 89 verse 3 teaches us, with acts of chesed is the world built. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach. I pray that this finds you well and safe and warm and receiving the beauty and sweetness of this holiday of Passover. The world is sustained and built by chesed. Chesed, a not so easy to define concept in Judaism, one of those things we know when we see and we certainly know when we feel it. We usually define chesed as loving kindness, but as we'll see, it can mean just a little bit more than that. This week's Parsha, read particularly for the Shabbat of Chol HaMoed, Passover, comes from the book of Exodus. And in it, we encounter Moses bargaining, pleading with God, "Let me know your presence. I need to feel you close to me." And God makes Moses a wonderful offer. He says, "I will show you my glory, but you cannot look at me face to face, because no mortal can do so and live. But I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and my glory will pass by. You will see me from the back, but you will not see my face." That's already borne out earlier in the chapter. And there's a verse here that leapt off the page to me this time reading through. Easy to miss, but so powerful and so deep. Moses is bargaining with God. He says in Exodus chapter 33, verse 13, "Now if I have truly gained your favor, your grace, pray let me know your ways that I may know you and continue in your grace. Consider too that this nation is your people." Verse 14, "Vayomar," and God said, "Panai yelechu v'hanichoti lach." My face will go walking before you, and I will lighten your burden. I will comfort you, more literally. This extraordinary little verse, only 5 words long, is rather easy to get lost in the grand and sweeping gestures of particularly this parsha. This is also the parsha of the golden calf and the recasting of the second tablets of the law, which Moses had shattered the first set. Lots of drama, lots of strife, lots of big, grand gestures. But even in this deeply mystical Torah portion, and especially in the Haftarah, the incredible mystical vision of Ezekiel of the restoring of the dry bones in the valley, it's a metaphor for the coming back together of the Jewish people who were in exile, being brought back to the promised land. This is drama and visuals at their most Hollywood level. But here, in this tiny little verse, is the essence of so much of what this time and this life can mean for us. When we extend ourselves, when we go before someone, if you will, we lighten their load. We help to lead them from one place to another. That is the true meaning of chesed. God is not, as we read in the stories of Elijah, in the wind and in the fire and in the earthquake, but in the kol demama daka, the still small voice, the tiny gestures and small words extended from one person to the next, in acts of chesed, which make up the building blocks of our world. Just a few verses after God places Moses in the cleft of the rock, God declares God's own most essential attributes. And it's these words that in normal times we would stand in front of the ark on the holidays and proclaim together. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum Vechanun, Erech Apayim Verav Chesed Ve'emet. O God, the Eternal One, is full of compassion and grace, slow to anger, and abundant in chesed, abundant in kindness. Not a little bit, not a medium amount of kindness, but abundant, redolent with kindness. This word chesed, usually translated as loving kindness, gets a slightly different twist in much of our tradition, much of our soul work that we call Mussar. This midah of chesed, Alan Marinus, the author of our basic text for Mussar, Everyday Holiness, says that chesed, as we've come to learn about it, should be the kind of act that we do for another with little to no expectation of reciprocity or reward. He redefines chesed not to be loving kindness, as is it often rendered, but instead, chesed is generous, sustaining benevolence. He acknowledges the language isn't as simple or as elegant maybe as loving kindness, but chesed as generous, sustaining benevolence. In other words, exactly what God offers to Moses. I will comfort your journey. I will lighten the load. Rabbi Leon Kahane of blessed memory, many of you have heard me speak of him. He was the first rabbi for whom I provided cantorial services back in the mid-90s. He knew what it was to need and receive kindness. And he loved the phrase, random acts of kindness and senseless acts of beauty. I came to learn that this notion was written down, legendarily anyway, on a placemat in a Sausalito restaurant in 1982 by a woman named Anne Herbert. She wanted to make a turnabout to recast the notion that was unfortunately coming into common parlance in that time, the notion of random acts of violence and senseless acts of cruelty. And so she stood the idea on her head and ultimately wrote a book published in 1993 called Random Kindness and Senseless Acts of Beauty, chronicling the stories of acts of chesed around the world. And when I looked it up, though there was a long list of examples of individuals and groups that have made chesed, made kindness, the core of their daily and weekly work, the first example on the list was the phrase with which I started this little talk a few minutes ago. Psalms 89 verse 3, Olam chesed yibaneh. By chesed is the world sustained. Rabbi Kahane loved that phrase because he knew how important it was to build a world with kindness. He and a group of 7 other Jews were hidden in the steeple room of an abandoned church in the forests of Poland by a young man who had no reason to care for this group of Jews other than a sense of chesed, a sense of random and maybe even senseless or perhaps foolish insofar as his own safety was concerned, acts of kindness to sustain this group of Jewish people to whom he had little to no connection. He was the youngest of 7 children in a family where they were raised to be profoundly sympathetic to the Nazi cause. But this young man felt and did otherwise. Rabbi Kahane, sustained by the benevolence and generosity of this young man's chesed, came to the United States, married and raised a family, and was a devoted and magnificent, loving, chesedic rabbi every single day of his life. As we look at this time, we may be tempted to say, what kind of chesed can I share with the world? Where are my acts of senseless beauty and random kindness needed the most? It will be different for each of you. And yet, as we strip away so many of the distractions of the life that we have known until now, I suspect that chesed is very much at the core of what we are doing every single day. Chesed to family, to friends, to neighbors, helping out in any way we can, maybe extra gifts of tzedakah, helping out with chores if we're able to, grocery shopping if that's healthy and good for us to do, just sharing a little bit of what we have. When we share and care, that's when we do as God offered to Moses. We lighten the load. And it's important that we also remember to extend a little bit of additional chesed and kindness to ourselves. That might feel almost unfair to so much of the world that is hurting so much right now, but tending to ourselves is essential. It's in the great tradition of Hillel. If we are not for ourselves, who will be for us? So it is all right and more than permissible to extend in the ways that you can a little extra sweetness and chesed to yourselves. Be abundant with your chesed, overflowing with your kindness, just as God bids us to do in this parsha. We have arrived at the period of counting the Omer, and in modern times, instead of bringing a sheaf of barley every day for 49 days, culminating at Shavuot, there is a tradition now to do work on the soul. And I can imagine that you've already guessed what is the theme of this first week. Each week has a soul trait that we work on. Of course, it's Chesed. This second day of counting the Omer, which is today, this Shabbat, this day combines Chesed as the overarching trait with a little bit of Gevura, a little bit of restraint or discipline or strength, because Chesed flowing without a little bit of restraint is erring too much on the side of a good thing. Chesed must always be tempered by a little bit of Gevura, a little bit of boundary, restraint, and self-preservation. So on this second day of the Omer, as we balance Chesed and Gevura, let's think about the art, the practice that's inherent with that idea. It does take practice, and it may not come that easily, but extend extra Chesed to the world, to each other, and to yourself at this time. And in this manner, Olam Chesed Yibaneh. The world will be built and sustained, and we also plant the seeds of Olam, another meaning of which is eternity. Let's sing it together. The melody of another Bay Area talent, Rabbi Menachem Creditor. Olam Chesed Yibaneh, Yala lai lai lai, Yala lai lai. Olam Chesed Yibaneh, Yala lai lai lai, Yala lai lai. Olam Chesed Yibaneh, Yala lai lai lai, Yala lai lai. Olam Chesed Yibaneh, Yala lai lai lai, Yala lai lai. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.